Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we are talking about critical thinking, but more focused on evidence evaluation and determining source credibility, if you will, or finding some ways to determine if a source is credible. For many of you, this is a redo of the lecture, but if this is your first time watching, this is part of the listening audience analysis critical thinking unit of the class or the module. The idea behind critical thinking is really, really difficult to grasp. We talk a lot about it. We often say the words critical thinking a lot, but it's really, really hard to determine if we're doing it well or if we're doing it at all, honestly. So the idea here is to give you some concepts, some vocabulary terms, some ideas to determine if a source is credible, to analyze information, and hopefully give you some tools to improve your critical thinking and ultimately improve the sources and the information you're using in your speeches. So I have this claim here that cheesecake is actually a pie and should be called cheese pie because this is a stance that I take often because I think it's accurate. I think cheesecake is actually more of a pie than a cake, and this will come into play a little bit more later on, but it's one of those things that we can do some research on, we can talk about, we can discuss in a fun, lighthearted manner, and we'll circle back to it in just a few minutes. But first and foremost here, we have our first couple of concepts for evaluating evidence. So we have the terms accessibility, credibility, and consistency. Accessibility is looking at how accessible the information is. So is information behind a paywall? Is it written in a way that makes it really difficult to access the information? Who can edit it? Who can edit the information? This is all information that we want to think about because this can help determine whether or not we would consider a source quality or not. If, for me personally, if something's not accessible, that's a red flag for me. I question that, which if you're thinking about it, that's a lot of academic information. Most published articles, peer-reviewed published articles, are behind a paywall. They're part of a database that you have to pay lots of money to get access to. And if that's where the best information is, how can we expect people to know the best information? Because most people aren't going to pay to have access to those databases, right? The other problem with accessibility, at least in academia for me, is that things are often written in a way that make them really difficult to understand. And we'll say, yeah, well, we need people to understand these complex ideas, and we can't water them down or whatever reason you may have. But I think it can be written in a way that makes it more accessible, and this is something that I think about often. So, for example, I'm reading a book, and in this book, they use the statement cognitive schemas, and cognitive schema is essentially your thought structure. And the sentence was saying that your cognitive schemas impact the way that you view the world or alter your worldview. Well, we can also just say your thought structures, the way that we think about things, impacts the way that we view the world. Getting to the same point, right? But it's different. So I think about accessibility as something that is under-addressed, and I have it first here simply because I think we should be addressing it more often. Next, we have credibility. When this word is going to be used in two different ways during this lecture. We're going to think about analyzing overall credibility, but we also want to think about credibility of an individual source. So we want to think about the author's credentials. What makes that person a credible source? We want to think about why we consider any source credible. Is it from an organization we support? Is it from a person we support? Is it the first thing that popped up on Google? Probably not going to be the best source if that's the case. But the idea here is we want to think about what makes something credible. Is it the number of degrees that they have? Is it their professional experience in a field? Is it where they posted that information? Is it because lots of people can edit it, like a Wikipedia? Are we crowdsourcing information? Is that credible or not? Why or why not? We want to think about our own perceptions of credibility and how this impacts how we think about other sources' credibility. It's really, really important because it's something that we we perceive credibility in different ways. And as public speakers, our audience is going to perceive our credibility by our body language, the way we sound, our gestures, how we use the space that we're in. These are all things that are going to impact our audience's perceptions of credibility for us. But also, we're hopefully going to have some outside information that's going to help support our stance, and that's going to impact our credibility as well, or our ethos. So we really, really want to be aware of credibility from a variety of different perspectives. Next, we have consistency. So consistency is really a pretty simple concept. We want to think about, is the information within whatever source, is that consistent within itself? Do we have linguistic consistency? Is the language used throughout that document, are they saying the same things? Are they talking about the same things? If you think about if you were having an argument with somebody and they changed what they're saying about something, well, they're changing the argument. We want to be aware of that. And the same thing when we're reading an article. If somebody changes what they're saying about something, we don't have linguistic consistency. If they change the way that they're saying it, we don't have linguistic consistency. That should be a red flag. That doesn't mean you dismiss that source altogether, but that should be just a little note. Like, oh, change the way we're talking about it. Maybe there's a reason. But also we want to think about consistency in a more holistic view. We want to think about consistency throughout the discipline. This goes beyond nations, right? Beyond states, beyond borders. We want to think about the consistency of ideas internationally and globally. If you have an idea or if somebody has an idea that goes against the generally accepted knowledge, what we accept to be true about something, about a field, about a concept, about a theory, whatever it might be, if it violates all of that general knowledge that has been tested and has been discussed for a long time, you should be questioning that, because it's new information that goes against the grain. Sometimes that information is correct or accurate or gets us down a different path, which is a good thing, but a lot of the times it's not. So we want to be aware of that consistency. We want to think about how this new information interacts with the old information. That's really, really important for a lot of different things as we progress. Our next 4 concepts are going to be recency, relevance, documentation, and intended audience. Again, these ones are pretty simple, straightforward, but again, they have a big impact in the way that we perceive credibility. So recency, when was it published? Was it published? Who can edit it? When was it last edited? These are all really, really important things to think about, because something that was published 75 years ago might not be relevant to what we know today. It might be completely opposite, right? So we want to think about that. We want to think about the recency. How does that information translate to a different context? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But you want to be aware of that. Next, we have relevance. Is the source talking about what they say they're talking about? That is sometimes really clear, but sometimes it's not, because we will see as we progress and we start talking more about language and argumentation that oftentimes people will use a logical fallacy that it requires that they bring in outside information to distract from a flawed main point. So if we bring in irrelevant information and allow that into the argument and we allow it to alter the argument, well, now we're no longer relevant. We're not talking about what we were originally talking about. So we want to really be aware of that. We want to be aware of when people do those things, when they bring in that information that just makes you go, what? That doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. And it happens pretty often just in our day-to-day conversations. So be aware of that. Next, we have documentation. So this is, does the author state their source? We hear this all the time in public discourse, social media. What is your source? What is your source? And then we get one source and everybody picks it apart and they say, oh no, here's why it's good, here's why it's bad. Well, that's one source in an ocean of sources. So we want to think about the consistency of that source, of those sources. We want to think about how credible those sources are as a whole. We want to think about what makes a source credible, so that when we are documenting our sources, we're documenting quality sources that we can argue for why they are quality, why they are credible. So we really, really want to think about documentation, but it's not just, do they have a bibliography or works cited page? We want to actually look at those sources and think about them, because that's really important. You could have 30, 40, maybe okay sources, questionable sources, or 5, 8, 10, 12 really good sources. How do we weigh that? How do we weigh those two? And that's something that you're going to have to do pretty often as academics, as students, but also as public speakers. You're going to have to do research and bring in outside sources. And you want to be aware of how that information is documented. Also, it can get you in trouble for plagiarism and that kind of stuff. So make sure you're documenting your sources. Last but not least, we have intended audience. This again goes back to accessibility. We often think about intended audience as written for professionals or for academics or for a popular audience or a general audience. And we will, in academics, often say you need to have peer-reviewed academic journals. And we do that because they go through the peer review process. They're written for a professional group of experts. But that's a problem, because if they're written for a professional group of experts, that information is not always going to be super accessible to somebody in their first, second year of college or somebody outside of that discipline, right? So intended audience goes both ways. We can say, yes, this is credible information because it was written for a group of professionals in the field, but we can also say that takes away from the credibility because most people aren't going to be able to read and understand that because of the consistency, the linguistics involved, the accessibility of it. Somebody has to pay to get access. But also on the other side of that, if we have a popular source, say a popular science book, what kind of editing and review process did that go through, right? So intended audience, none of these are really just pass or fail type things. They all come together to give us hopefully a better idea of what makes a source valuable or not. This is super important because we need to have sources to support what we're saying, to support our stance. Now this is a process called crap detection, and yes, that was the original academic terminology for it. We now call it triangulation. It was developed by Howard Rheingold, and the idea was that with any one stance that we have or that somebody else has, anything that we're evaluating, we want to look at that stance and try to find 3 independent sources that support that stance or say something about it. And that gives us a better picture of what's going on. This is a really effective way to evaluate information just in your day-to-day life. Can you find 3 independent sources that support or take away from that stance? And that will give you some really valuable information, especially if you think about a source. Take source 1, you analyze its credibility using some of the concepts we've covered today, and you can argue for or reasonably say this is a credible or not a credible source, and then that will either support or take away from the stance. If you're thinking about this, any one stance you make, well, in just a basic essay, you have 2 to 3 main points, right? Those are stances that you're taking. For each one of those main points, you should have at least 3 sources to support that stance. If you have 3 main points, that's a minimum of 9 sources just for a basic essay. And again, we get back to that documentation idea. We want to bring in outside information. We want to bring in good quality, credible sources to support what we're saying. Now, of course, this is not typically the way that we determine source credibility or even source requirements for assignments, but it's just some way for you to think about analyzing a source, analyzing a stance. And that gets us to the end of our lecture. We've discussed accessibility, credibility, consistency, recency, relevance, documentation, and intended audience. Again, none of those concepts is meant to be a one-stop shop where you can say this is credible because it's accessible, it's credible because it's consistent, it's not credible because it's got poor documentation. They're all meant to just give us a better view and give us a better way to analyze information so that we can come to stronger conclusions, more reasonable conclusions about the credibility of any information that we're going to use or that we come across. And then we went over triangulation, which is a process for analyzing the quality of one's stance. I hope that you all learned something today and that you use these concepts, you use this terminology, not only in your day-to-day life, but also when you are preparing your assignments and working through any academic work that you're going to be doing here on out.